Hello, welcome to our weekly sessions. I'm Masood Raja, as you might already know, and this is number 10 in our series on postcolonial studies, 10th session. And today we'll be talking about Arundhati Roy's novel, The God of Small Things. And the reason I chose this novel, of course, primarily is because I'm teaching it this semester, but also it is probably one of my most favorite novels. And I consider it as one of the best novels, not just by an Indian author, but just generally a novel ever written in the 20th century. And of course, there are quite a few other reasons too, which we will get to. I will not spend a lot of time on summarizing the novel and telling you about characters, because obviously, if you are here today, you pretty much either know about the novel or have read the novel. But one important thing about the novel is that besides the narrative and the plot, what it also does is it allows us to learn more about southern parts of India. And if you look at the screen, I mean, the novel is set in the state of Kerala, which is the southwestern state of India. And one thing interesting about the state is historically, this is where it wasn't then called Kerala. That happens in 1956 through the States Act of India. This is where Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese so-called discoverer, had landed while in his journey to find the Spice Islands and the spice trade. Now, this entire region was then divided into two kingdoms, but this was the region which kind of governed the spice trade, upon which first the Arab traders had a monopoly. Then eventually the Portuguese come in and they establish a toehold here. They have a lot of power here. They are the ones also who bring Catholicism to this region. They are eventually defeated by the local, because of a local uprising. They are replaced by the Dutch. Now remember, Dutch had strong influence in this area and also in Malay Peninsula. The Dutch was also finally defeated by the combined local forces of, I think, two Rajas. And then eventually the East India Company establishes their rule in the area, and then the British govern it. But in terms of Indian states, Kerala is really interesting, first of all, of course, because it has a Portuguese history and had Portuguese colonizers there, even a viceroy for quite a few years. And it also, as you can tell from the names of the characters, it also inherits and maintains some of its Catholic tradition. So there is a huge Christian population as well. In terms of its contemporary state, Kerala has the highest level of education literacy rate in India. It's the second strongest economy in India. And it's also a state which has constantly had communist political parties run it and govern it. Part of its success, of course, is that during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, quite a lot of people from Kerala became international workers, right, in the Middle East, in rest of the world, and it's their remittances that enable the state to have such huge resources. Part of it is also that in the late after 1956, when it becomes a state, when the communist coalition wins the government, the first few reforms they do are the educational reform and land reform. And one of the very few states in India where actually some land redistribution was accomplished, and the big land holdings were broken down and land was distributed to peasants. So kind of a success story of a kind of leftist politics combined with capitalism. And of course, then it is rich in natural resources, right? In forests and in tourism. So all of these things make Kerala a really remarkable state. And the novel also becomes remarkable because it was one of the first major novels that wins a Booker Prize, is published in 1997, which is set in South India. Right, which doesn't have these references to Bombay and Delhi and northern India. It is that thing also that makes the novel really peculiar. So you can't necessarily call it a novel of India, just like when we talked about Salman Rushdie last week and we talked about Midnight's Children, we call it a novel of India because it deals with larger Indian issues and is set mostly in northern India. This is a South Indian novel and a novel about Kerala. And then, of course, it kind of centers the experience of one state in the South, Southwest. It introduces us to their culture, the complexity of it. And I think in that sense, it is really an important novel. So that's something like my opening spiel. Let me go and welcome who all have joined us. So we have Dini Maran, and you are working on this novel for your dissertation. Great, good to have you here. Infinita, again, good to have you here. Okay, so Dini, if you cannot see anything on your screen, I don't know. Can the others tell me if they can see me? Because no, you don't have to pay or anything. Anyone who has access to this YouTube link should be able to see it. This is not set up for members or anything. So please see, maybe there must be something going on with your computer. Oroko, welcome back. We missed you for a couple of weeks. Then we have Ovas, welcome back from Pakistan. Sania, also welcome. Welcome from Pakistan. So I will continue my thoughts about the novel, but then you can obviously ask any questions that you have. So, I mean, if you go over the plot, it's interesting in terms of temporality. Parts of the plot is in 1969 when both our two protagonists, Ista and Rahil, are 7 years old, and we are in a small town which is named right in the opening line of the novel, right? And it's in the Kottayam district. And Ayamenam is the hometown of the two kids, right? That's where the novel is set in the beginning. And so the novel moves from 1960s, the childhood of our main characters, to 1993, where the story ends. So these are the two time frames that it is dealing with. In terms of its characters, we, of course, have Rahil, who is the main character. We have Ista, who is the main character. We have baby Komacha, who is their great aunt. We have their mother, who is one of the main characters. And then, of course, Veluta is the main character of the story. Okay. And the setting pretty much is in Kerala, in Kottayam, and where their mother gets married. And now the complexities in the novel are that the family that we are reading about, they are Syrian Orthodox Christians. And so that's their heritage. The people that we are dealing with, so we know that Mamaji got married to a Hindu. So their father was a Hindu. which is totally frowned upon. And then, even though this family is Christian, the caste is still a part of it. So they consider themselves, and they are, in terms of caste, they are upper class, but also in terms of their economic potential, they are factory owners. They own a pickle making factory. So they are from the top echelon of the community. But the two children who are twins are considered inferior and contaminated, and their mother as well, by the Christian community as well, because their mother had married a non-Christian, right? And then we have the figure of Velutha, right, who is a Dalit, right, who is out of caste Hindu. Now, even though he is part of the Marxist movement, caste plays a huge role in how he's treated, in how he is viewed. We know that he's a wonderful human being. The kids love him, right? And he is smart and intelligent and industrious. There is no doubt about that. And then, of course, there is the love between their mother and Velutha, right? And so part of the novel, a lot of people see this sentence, it's about the love rules, right? It's not just about the love rules, it's also about how does the societal norm decide for us the value of other human beings, right? How deeply can a system of divisions be incorporated into our consciousness that we are constantly, without knowing it, monitoring our own place in that hierarchy? So that famous scene where Velutha's father says he will kill him himself for transgressing the caste boundaries, right? Isn't just that his father doesn't love him. I mean, that would be too reductive an explanation of it. It is that how deeply can you internalize the logic of the system in which you exist, that when someone transgresses that, you blame them, right? And hold them accountable. That's any system, ideological or social, in a way, then underwrites our own identity to a point that we will repudiate those we love ourselves for that system, for the integrity of that system, instead of taking a stand with them. So that's also what the novel questions, right? How do we become who we are? Part of it maybe is through individual choice, right? Like baby Kumacha, she is evil in a sense because she has had an unhappy life and she has made it a point to make everyone else around her unhappy too. But part of what we become is systemic, it's larger than ourselves. And I think that's what also the novel explores. And we can talk about it more if you have any questions. Now, on a side note, a lot of times I get these questions from people on the channel as to, I'm writing about this, what should I do? The point is, obviously I cannot answer those micro questions because I don't know what level you're writing. What have you written before? Do you know how to write a paper? But the idea is when you're dealing with a novel of this complexity, it's very hard in a paper or two to actually tackle a whole novel. Okay, so what I advise people to do when they teach it or talk about it is to figure out which aspect of the novel you want to write about or talk about. Is it going to be its temporality? Is it going to be the politics that undergirds it? Is it going to be human relationships? Is it going to be caste? Is it going to be class? Because every single conceptual choice that you make will then enable you to talk about the novel in a more complex way. And also, please keep in mind, in order to write about the novel, you have to understand the novelistic form itself. You have to go read, people like Ian Watt and Lukács and others who have tried to define the novel, as a form. Because if you understand the novelistic form, then you can handle it really well. So these are like some of my ideas. So let me ask you a question. Dini is saying that, I don't know, that Dini cannot see anything on the screen. Can all of you? Okay, it's sorted out. Uh, okay, so as I said, no, you don't have to be a paid member to be a part of this conversation. So let me also welcome Saqib. I think I didn't welcome you, and then Anum has joined us, and but yeah, you don't have to be a paid member to join this. I have not become that capitalistic yet. I might get there, but no. Okay, so these are some of my thoughts about the novel. And then one thing that I would highly like to point to you, even though, you know, Arundhati Roy is not just a novelist. I mean, after she finished this novel, it took her 20 years to publish her next novel. She's also a very activist. She got successful, right, with this novel, but then she did something with it. That is the most inspiring part of her life to me. You know, she joined the most liberal causes in her country. She has fought for justice. She has done a lot of journalistic work. She has covered the Marxist movement, the Dalit movement in the South. So that gives you another good example of what kind of a life can you choose after you become successful as a scholar or as a writer. And so in that sense, she also gives us this example of someone who actually went and put her politics in practice and went and did something with her life. And so we ought to read her like that too. If you want to really read some of her best writing, it's her introduction to Ambedkar's essay, The Annihilation of Caste. I have it somewhere, it's right over there, where she writes about 100-page introduction to that, which gives you her understanding of Ambedkar's importance for India as the leader of the Dalits, as the framer of the Indian Constitution, as in opposition to Gandhi, right, and his insistence upon maintaining the caste barriers and the caste boundaries, right. The book also then, beyond, you know, its politics and what happens to the characters of in the book, which of course is tragic. Do keep in mind that the language, the way it is written, is what made it also an amazing book. I mean, if you just look at this passage, right? So small God laughed a hollow laugh and skipped away cheerfully like a rich boy in shorts. He whistled, kicked stones. The source of his brittle elation was the relative smallness of his misfortune. He climbed into people's eyes and became an exasperating expression, right? This is the God of small things, the God who, I don't know, takes care of small thing or deals with smaller people. I don't know. I have not been able to find a mythological analog for God of small things. It's not like in the Hindu pantheon, there is a God of small things against the God of big things. But what you can understand or discern from the novel is this idea of, you know, who does take care of small things if the big gods are too busy, you know, in any given pantheon. Another thing that I would like to point out is, even though she's from the South, and of course Hindi or Hindustani or Urdu is not her first language, I always found like the chapter 3, if you look at the chapter of the title 3, Big Man, the Laltan, Small Man, the Mombati, this comes from Punjab, right? And from the Urdu tradition. When we were little, these are some of the things we would say: big man, the laltan; small man, the mombati. I mean, I guess those of you who know Hindi and Punjabi and Urdu can translate it, but literally what it means is that the big man is a lamp, like the hurricane lamp that you carry, and the little people are like candles. right? So this is something there in a chapter title with a lot of people would forget to notice, right? And if you look it up, chances are Wikipedia doesn't have an answer for that. But that's kind of another aspect of the novel that I like into what it does with language. So there are quite a few things that this novel is doing. It's dealing with two temporalities. We are skipping from one to the other. Sometimes we are in the past thinking about the present and the future. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Then another thing that it's doing is it's introducing us to culture, particularities of the culture of southwestern India, especially Kerala, which teaches us that India is not really a monolithic culture. Even Hinduism is not a monolithic religion. It has its regional permutations. Now, you already know that the great divide in Hinduism is the north-south divide. The Dravidian Hindus in the south are the original inhabitants of India. Okay, and there has always been this tension between the northern Hinduism and the southern Hinduism. So Anum says she has heard people in her family use that expression too. So yeah, absolutely. We used to use it when we were little kids. So she's picked it up from the Hindustani or Hindi tradition. So by and large, I mean, it's a tragic novel, right? I mean, if you go over the plot in the very beginning, we are at the moment when they've had a tragedy, when their uncle, whose daughter was visiting along with his ex-wife, Sophie Moll, we are at her funeral when the novel starts in Kottayam, right? And we then, through flashbacks, learn that the kids had gotten angry at their mother for considering them a burden, and they decide to escape to this abandoned house in the village. Their mom is locked up, and they don't know, but we know she's locked up because it has come out that she has had a relationship with Vilutha, who is out of caste or lower caste Hindu. Now, as they get to the island, Vilutha is hiding there because people are looking for him. And Sophie Moll drowns. And when they go to the police station, when Vilutha has been captured, they are led to believe that they will be considered responsible for Sophie Moll's death unless they denounce Vilutha and say that he had kidnapped them, right? And that's what they do. But Vilutha has already been beaten up so badly that he dies in prison. Now, that's the moment when Esther decides to stop speaking, right? He absolutely takes a vow of silence. Part of it, of course, is the guilt as what he has done, to renounce the very person whom he considered his friend. And then, of course, mom dies when she's 31. She's kicked out of the house. Then we follow the lives of the two children. Ista goes back to his father, right? Becomes completely engrossed in his own identity. He does the housework, does the shopping, but he doesn't do anything with his life. We have Rahel, who passes through life without committing to anything, marries some American, comes to America, has these jobs, gets a divorce. And by the time we reach the novel, and the novel starts there, that she has come back to her ancestral home. And finally, we realize that these two people are never going to find anyone else because one is always looking for the other. They are twins, right? But there are also love laws that they must transgress, right? So the novel ends in incest at the end. So the love laws are being transgressed by their mother, then by these two kids themselves. Even baby Komacha, the terrible human being in the novel, had fallen in love with a Catholic priest. So the question then in the novel for me is, who decides who we can love and how and why, right? And what happens to people if in a young age they have to go through these kind of decisions where they have to denounce someone that they love, or they have to see how world has treated them. How do you become Rahel? How do you become Isa? And that these are also some of the themes that we can talk about in the novel. Okay, so I have Habib here. How do the concept and the reality of the untouchable function in the novel? Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, if you read the novel, the answer is right there. How does it play out? That even when you're in a Marxist state and Veluta is the member of the local Marxist Communist Party, but even that, even the most revolutionary praxis, Marxism, cannot free you of the constraints of caste, right? So that's one lesson we can learn from it. My own reading of the caste system and how deeply it is entrenched, in India is that Islam, the so-called revolutionary religion, doesn't break through it in India as well. Okay, so people who become Muslim, if they were lower caste, they remain lower caste in Islam. I mean, if you go to rural parts of Pakistan, the society is still hierarchically defined. You could be Muslims, you can pray together in the mosque, but when you come home, I'm a Rajput, the guy living next to me in my village is a Chamar, is a Mochi, the other one is a barber, right? And there are no intermarriages. You can't think in my village, which has been Muslim for the past 500 years, you cannot imagine the family or a boy who is a barber's son or a shoemaker's son to even imagine considering falling in love and marrying with the Rajput family's daughter, or vice versa, right? So even though these religions promised to the Dalit population that if you convert to our faith, we will consider you equal in most of the Islamic part of South Asia, that doesn't give them the upward mobility. That's why if you look at Ambedkar's own actions after he had fought for the rights of the out-of-caste Hindus or Dalits, he eventually, on one single day, converts to Buddhism, along with, I think, 300,000 of his followers, right? He doesn't convert to Islam, he converts to Buddhism so that he can lead his followers to a casteless faith or practice. Anum says, I love the question the novel raised, things that we take for granted, things we never think to question are shown to be human constructs where society decides every aspect of our lives. Absolutely, yes. And I think that teaches us something else also, that most stringent social systems, the way they succeed is by offering themselves as natural, right? By offering themselves, this is how things are. I mean, think of it this way. If you have ever had an argument with your parents or with someone who is a religious figure and all, they would always tell you, this is how the world is. This is how the things are. You're a Muslim, here is Islam, you either follow it or you don't follow it. There is no ambivalent space in there. Because they have to offer the hierarchies of a culture or a life as natural, not needing a justification. So what the novel does brilliantly and with a heartbreaking lucidity is as to how these systems come to be, these systems that police who we love, or these systems that tell us what our value is in the world. And the novel does that brilliantly. Haroon Khan, sir, would you please shed light on postmodern terms such as pastiche and intertextuality in this novel? Well, I mean, if you watch my videos on pastiche and intertextuality, you can very easily do that yourself, right? Anything which stylistically or linguistically can be related to another work that she might be invoking, then the novel is intertextual. Anything that she picks up either from history or from another work and offers a reworking of it, but not in a parodic form, that would be pastiche, right? Because pastiche has to be respectful. If it is not, if it is making fun of a previously established practice, then it becomes a parody. So these are the things that you can very easily do yourself. Syed Saqib Ahmed, even Marxism doesn't free them from the reality of caste system. Isn't it because Marxism is a Western system and therefore cannot work in the East? I disagree with that. Marxism was a Western system, but we have made it our own. If you go and, I don't know where you are from, if you're from Pakistan, go and talk to some of the Marxists from Sindh, even from Punjab. It doesn't matter where a system comes from. You can always make it your own. The Indian Marxism, the Marxism in Kerala, isn't even Leninist Marxism. It's a mixture of Maoism, which of course is in the East, right? And a mixture of Leninist Marxism. That's why one of the Communist Party is called, Communist Party of CPIM is Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist, and then there is Communist Marxist Party that is Maoist. And there is no Western system, right? I mean, Pakistan is a democracy now. India is a democracy now. Pakistani democracy is different from Indian democracy. Indian democracy is different from United States democracy. The idea basically is that inherently all human beings are equal and have the same weight. So one vote, one person basically tells us that you don't qualify people to be human, you just count them, right? And that decides who gets to govern us. It is an imperfect system, but I don't believe in this, that this is East and West. I think we live in a world, there is no East and West left. The very people who keep telling us that West is evil and bad, I always say that they have no problem in using destructive technologies of the West. The Taliban, right? They want a pure 7th century Islam implemented in Afghanistan while they drive in Toyota and Nissan trucks made by Japan, a heretic nation, shoot guns made by Russia, use missiles that are built by America. All the modes of destruction of the West are okay, but somehow some ideas from the West are contaminated. So I disagree with that. Indian Marxism is inherently specific to which region of India you are. There isn't even a centralized hierarchy anymore. And it's particular to the local conditions, but the basic principles are the same. Redistribute the land. The peasants and workers should own the mode of production, should have equal rights, right? And those are the particularities. It fails in Kerala is because it is riven with the politics of caste, which is a powerful social system. And as I just told you and proved to you, that even the so-called Islam and its revolutionary potential doesn't break through it. Only in the urban areas of Pakistan you will see inter-caste marriages amongst Muslims. You go to the villages, Punjab, Sindh, even Sindh, not so operative in KPK, but you will still see those divisions. Chances are that people ask you, where is he from and what is his family? And no, this boy cannot marry that girl. So though that logic plays everywhere. So Anum says, I don't think that Marxism is a Western system because it is always adapted to the socio-political environment in which it is functioning. Absolutely, I agree with that. And the thing is that if you read, what is Marx studying, at least in Capital Volume 1? Capital, right? And how to respond to it. What kind of class system does it create? It doesn't matter wherever capital is or capitalism is operative, by and large, you can apply the same principles there. I mean, if you live in Pakistan with a purely Eastern system, if it's a capitalistic system, it will still have those who own the mode of production, and it will still have those who sell their own labor to make a living. So that agonistic view of the world will exist no matter where Marxism came from. Okay, good. Anum, Dr. Raja, are there specific books on Marxism or the history of Marxism in Pakistan, or are there any parties whose pages I can go to? Well, there is a wonderful book by Kamran Asghar Ali that came out about 3 years ago, and it's a good history of Pakistani Marxism, especially coming from Sindh, and that is published by Oxford University, plus I think it's called Surkh Salam. And I think that's a really good history of Pakistani Marxism. But other than that, you can go to Mazdoor Kisan Party, you can go to the Communist Party of Pakistan's website. I can also put you in touch with people who are active in those, and you can learn what their struggles have been. But the best book that I can find amongst the contemporary books is Kamran Asghar Ali's book, Surkh Salam. Okay, Larry is here. This is what Afro-pessimism posits. All class structures can be abolished, but the world will still be. Absolutely. And even more than that, so there are two things that are absolutely, I don't say that it will always exist, but the thing is, the problem with race and racial politics is that you cannot hide it. Right? I mean, it is on I am brown. It doesn't matter how educated I am or how sophisticated I am. If I come against racism, this is what they will see. Similarly, if you're black, no racist would worry about your humanity or your intrinsic value as a human being. So race is the most problematic flashpoint of cross-cultural conversations because you can't hide it. Of course, you can't hide your gender as well. But so, yes. So in so many ways, then caste is problematic because there are so many people, who are writing to justify it as well. And there is a reason for it. I mean, Gandhi has a whole pamphlet, right? Gandhi has a whole pamphlet where he encourages people from the Bhangi caste, right? The people who clean the streets and clean your, used to clean your toilets and everything, as to how the best way for them to perform in this life is to perform the duties of their caste. And so, I mean, the reason it's such a stringent system is because it doesn't just designate you that you are part of this caste. It makes your rebirth connected to whether or not you performed the duties of your caste or not, right? So that social system then keeps you not just in that particular caste, but also encourages you, since there is a belief in multiple returns, that if you, the only way you can be born as a dojati caste, as an upper caste, is if you perform the duties of your current caste. So that's why it becomes a highly stringent system. So Sayyid Saqib Ahmed, I am from KPK, Pakistan, from a village in District Dir. I'm a Sayyid and we are a majority in our village. Yes, you're right. They won't allow anyone to marry someone from a... Saqib, that's a really important point. Also, not just in KPK, But majority of people who are Sayyids, who claim their heritage from the family of the Prophet, would highly discourage their children to marry outside of any Sayyid families. We have in our own village, our peers, they have had so many intermarriages that when you go and meet them, every family, because of the intermarriages, has one or two children who are either disabled mentally or physically or autistic because of those intermarriages. But it would be very rare for a Sayyid family to either let their sons marry outside of the Sayyid family or even their daughters of him. That's unthinkable. So yes, but still in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, other than this, I think the hierarchies of work-related identity are not as stringent. I mean, no, one thing that I noticed in my exchanges with people, and I have extensive friendships and connections in KPK, is that no one is ashamed of work. People would tell you, oh, here is my cousin, he drives a rickshaw. Here is my cousin, man, he has a shoe shop. The hierarchies are there, but there is no social shame attached to what you do in KPK. Also in Balochistan to some extent, but the divisions are tribal. But if you come to Punjab and southern Punjab and parts of Sindh, these hierarchies are very highly maintained and regulated. And good. So we have two Sayyids agreeing to that. But it's not just that. So similarly, if you take this and implot it within the novel, in a way, the same social taboo is at play, right? Mama Ji, of course, even though she's a Christian, is from an upper caste family. So part of the problem is that she has had an illicit relationship, that is one, but two, she has had an illicit relationship with a low caste Hindu, and that is what actually makes people more mad at her. And to a point that we learn that Velutha, who we learn is brilliant, is kind, is funny, right? A perfect kind of man in so many ways. The only reason his body literally can be destroyed is because he has transgressed the caste barriers, right? Not just that he has had an illicit relationship, but that he has done out of caste his aspirations. He has desired a woman from an upper caste, right? And that is a huge moment in the novel, a huge critique of that way of thinking. And that even his Marxist comrades abandon him, right? Right. The police officer is slightly worried because he was arrested on a wrong pretext, right? Baby Kumacha had convinced the police that he had kidnapped the children, right? And he has already been beaten up by the cops. But cops also know that he's connected to the local Communist Party. So they are worried, right? But even the communists eventually, abandon him, don't fight for him. Okay. All right. So these are some of my thoughts. This novel is taught in Pakistani classrooms. And I was hoping that some more of the students will join us. But when you read it, it's a really complex novel. So I would say if you want to write about it, as always, I advise people to first find out, what is it that has already been published about the novel. And chances are you'll see there's a lot published about the novel. And if you go and research that, that will give you an idea of where do you want to enter the conversation. And that will tell you what else can you say or write about the novel. So here is a question. How could you best apply the work of the subaltern study groups to our work on the God of small things? Uh, well, I mean, you right there at the back are 10 volumes of subaltern studies that I have. So that means that subaltern studies is not one concept. So you go and pick up out of those 10 volumes. Are there any debates about caste? Are there any narratives of caste? Then are there any particular to the South? Right? You read those, and that gives you an idea of what is the history of caste, how did it operate in Kerala or in those regions, what are its larger ramifications. I highly recommend that you read um, Arundhati Roy's Introduction to Annihilation of Caste, right? And of course, read the Annihilation of Caste itself, because that is a very important document from B.R. Ambedkar. After you've read those, then you pick up which part of that debate appeals to you that you can use to reread the novel. But as I said, this is probably one of the most highly written about novels. So you don't just go in and say, I'm going to talk about the caste in God of Small Things, because people will come back and say, well, 1,000 other people have also talked about caste in A God of Small Things. I don't think so. It's a very hidden secret in the novel. The question to you, if you're writing a PhD dissertation, I will pose, had you been my student, is what is so different that you are saying about caste in the novel that others have not said so? And that's the question you will have to answer as you write about the novel. Um, Okay, so even in caste, the socioeconomic hierarchies are increasingly strictly maintained. Yes, and do keep in mind that I live in United States of America. We are here in Dallas area. There is a huge South Asian population here. And I just recently read an article, I think it was New Yorker that did it, where young people will inform you that companies, Indian owned companies over here, if you work for them as an Indian, American, right, from India, people are afraid of sharing their caste. And there is a vocabulary for that too. Okay, they are outed. So if, like someone from an upper caste Hindu American family is running a company, they don't want to hire, even in America, so called low caste Hindus. And then it's strongly operative in South Asian families over here in marriages and everything else, right? Some people do break through it, but it still follows them here, the politics and the social aspects of caste. And think about it in Pakistan, we do it all the time. Like my own village family, if someone becomes really successful and becomes rich, right, and we are the Rajputs, right, we are at the top of the apex, and people who feel resentful about someone else succeeding, at the end they're like, well, it doesn't matter, he's a mochi, he's a nai, because they refer back to their caste. It still follows them. And that is another problem of upward mobility in India as well as in Pakistan, is that you can become economically successful and rise high in the social order of hierarchy of economy. But in so many ways, the caste would still be operative, because I'm not saying all across the board, in urban centers and others, but by and large, we already know about the Sayyid families, right? That's a peculiar case, but others too, highly educated people will say, oh, we can't give our son married. Who did? In cases of sons, maybe they'll be okay, but for their daughters, they'll be very particular. So it the system of caste still follows people over here in United States as well. Um, Okay, Salman Akram, my current reading. Good. I don't know what your current reading is, but I'm glad you mentioned that. Uh, Fayaz Ahmed, sir, please share your thoughts on my question posted earlier. I'll have to go up and see. If you could post it again, that would be very helpful. But let me see where Fayaz Ahmed is. India is a secular state, but it is a caste-ridden. Pakistan has the constitution granting equal rights for cities, but it's not. Why? Well, I mean, for this, you always have to learn that there are textual realities and then there are ground realities. In the constitution, India is a secular state. In Pakistani constitution, we are supposed to be a democracy. So we have United States is we the people in order to make a better union. Does that mean that there is no racism in United States? There is no sexism in United States? So the first distinction that you make in terms of exclusions is whether it is de jure or de facto. So is it inscribed in the Constitution that some people will be inferior to others? Then the problem is constitutional, it is textual. And the best way to remedy that is to change the laws. In the United States, we had Jim Crow laws. After they got eliminated, at least legally, no one could say, you are black, you can't be in this part of the town. We now have laws that permit gay people to marry each other. We have laws which allow gay people to inherit each other's property. Previously, it wasn't a law, so they didn't have those rights. Then after you made a law, I mean, there is no law in the US legal system that says white people are superior and others are inferior. But that doesn't eliminate the de facto racism of a culture. That takes a longer time. Similarly, India can have a secular constitution with a few caveats in it, right? That constitution alone does not provide that everything would be hunky-dory after that. That struggle still is in the streets. Pakistan, the same way. It can have an Islamic constitution, whatever that means to Pakistanis, right? But if it has inherent inequalities written in the constitution, then first of all, those inequalities will need to be contested. And then you go into the cultural and political realm, and there are a lot of things that happen that are counter to whatever a nation or its constitution or laws aspire to. So we can't say this is a secular state and this is a religious state simply because a piece of paper has declared so. We also have to look at the regional particularities, the politics, right, that is mobilized, and then see where a given specific culture is. So, okay, Salman, your current reading is God of Small Things. Cool. Okay, I have Muhammad Owais Afzal. Doctor, how can we, your students, can take the membership of Postcolonial space? Please guide us as it is not being offered. Well, the membership, you don't really need it. Okay. The membership thing is if anyone wants to support our channel by, giving us some money. Most of what we do on this channel doesn't require membership. All that I have promised people who are members is that I will do one exclusive conversation with them once a month. That's all. Other than that, whatever is available on this channel, whatever is available on my website, it's open. Anyone can use it. And then secondly, I don't think so memberships are offered in Pakistan. So membership, the idea behind it isn't that you create exclusive content for members. The idea is that those people who run their channels get their subscribers who are invested in what the channel does to get to support them. And mostly YouTube keeps most of the money anyway. Okay, so I have Tania Asif. Also, in countries like India and Pakistan, the said laws are not followed or implemented from the top as well. So people have no precedents to turn to. Yes, I mean, sometimes a protection is granted in the Constitution, and it's either denied outrightly or not implemented. So the problem is, of course, amongst the people as well, but also at the top. And it also depends on who is in power, what is their agenda, what part of the conversation do they want to privilege. And then they make policy and laws. So what I'm trying to say is that simply because a nation claims to be secular or claims to be Marxist doesn't necessarily mean that they are secular and they are Marxist. I mean, look at China. Someone just posed a question to me through comments on another video suggesting that China was somehow a Marxist nation at this point. And I was like, yeah. I mean, their constitution says they are a communist country and they have a communist party, but they are the most capitalistic state at this point. So they have destroyed all the enabling aspects of Maoism and then created a system of government which is still centralized and is one-party system and is still autocratical while opening up their economy. So they have the worst of both the worlds or best of both the worlds, but democracy it is not, and Marxism or Maoism it is not, right? But on paper, yeah, they are a communist regime. I am currently writing on love, family, and employment as informed by caste. I was asking mainly about these theorists, Spivak, Gua, Ghosh, and Chakrabarti. So I don't know if any of these, Spivak, you will probably find something about, but I don't recall Ranajit Guha saying anything about love and all. And then Deepesh Chakrabarti also not, but you can retrieve from Deepesh Chakrabarti's Nation and its Fragments that moment where he is discussing Hindi drama and where the figure of the native woman is juxtaposed against the caricatured Western woman. Because look, Chakrabarti's argument is that the concept of nation didn't come to India through downward percolation, which is what we call the Cambridge thesis, but rather the idea of the nation emerged in the private sphere, and that the private sphere was immune to the political influences of the colonizers. So if you go and read that carefully enough, maybe you can mobilize that to read the novel. But pretty much, usually when people ask me, what can I use to read this novel, I'm usually clueless. Because even when I have to read a novel, I have to go figure out what is it I'm trying to say. And in order to figure that out, I have to go do my research to figure out what has been said about the novel. And that gives me a space to enter. And that's the process you will have to do if you're going to write an extensive work on the God of Small Things. Another important thing to keep in mind is if you're writing a dissertation, it cannot just be on the God of Small Things, right? It can be on Arundhati Roy. And if you do that, then you can incorporate her journalistic writings, her political writings, and see if they talk to each other, right? For example, my master's thesis was not on Midnight's Children, it was on Salman Rushdie, right? But in my introduction, I said I will only deal with the first 3 novels of Salman Rushdie, so that gave me a limited scope. So I would suggest, instead of saying I will write a dissertation on God of Small Things, which would be very limiting, you do a dissertation on her as an author. After all, people do write dissertations on Shakespeare and Ben Jonson, right? So you're currently looking at Can the Subaltern Speak? Yes, I have about 4 videos on it. I haven't done the concluding video on it. But if you are going to use Can the Subaltern Speak, you will also have to read her revision of Three Women's Texts, Rani F. Seymour, and Can the Subaltern Speak in her book, A Critique of Postcolonial Reason, because she goes and tweaks those. So be aware of that. Nimra Javed, why social identities are so powerful, how they have been strengthened over time, and what factors strengthen social identities in a society. I mean, that's a really complex question, and I'm not a sociologist, but I mean, you have the answer to that question yourself. I mean, how do we become who we are? I have a lecture on Mark Bracker's work. It's listed under pedagogy. But most theorists of identity would tell you that our identities are formed under three separate registers, right? So we have certain narrative structures that we rely on. These are the stories that we have internalized, stories that have been told to us, religious, ethnic, national, and they become a register under which we define who we are. Then we have, and that is the linguistic register. Then we have affective register, things we like, things we feel about, the music we like, the smells that we like, right? But out of them, the linguistic register is the strongest. And that means that we all carry, wherever we go, certain what they call self-serving narratives. These self-serving narratives have already told us what constitutes a good male identity, what constitutes a good female identity, and it's always in juxtaposition to our others. I'm a Pakistani, she's an Indian, I'm supposed to hate her, that kind of idea, right? But our problem always is that we are trying, wherever we enter a space, a hostile space or a new space, we are anxious about ourselves. So most of our energies are spent on protecting our identity. That's why, teach parents who would tell you don't go to a university because your faith will be destroyed, are worried that if added information is given to you, what they have granted you as your religion will become untenable, right? So if we buy into this, that part of who we are, coming from Freud even and Lacan, that we are socialized into being who we are, right? Internally, so if that is what we buy into, then we know that identity is created because from our very childhood, the stories we are told, things we believe in, don't just structure our identity, they also give us a worldview. And because of that worldview, we already sift dangerous knowledges away from our identity because those are threatening. So, in order to change someone's point of view, the latest research has shown us that giving them more facts is not going to do that, because their investment in identity is not necessarily purely rational, right? It is emotional. So what we need to do then is to enable them to strengthen their identities enough so that they can question the very frames in which that their identity is framed. They have the courage to do so, right? And if they have the courage to do so, or think at least outside of their identity, only then the schemas in their brain that determine what they consider right and wrong will shift. And unless we change those schemas, we cannot change people's points of view. So I have a lecture on it already recorded. It's under critical pedagogy, Mark Bracker. I highly recommend you should watch it. But these are some of my ideas as to how the social, in so many ways, doesn't just determine who we are, but inscribes that into our very souls, so to speak. So Fiyaz, class distinction is there all over the world. How do you see this marginalization owing to caste and social class based on economy? So, I mean, any given culture is a class-based culture. There are social hierarchies at play. There is no simply egalitarian society where everyone is equal. The question that is important is to know how strongly those boundaries are maintained, how stringent the system is. Are those boundaries permeable? If they are, how? Is it through education? Is it through entrepreneurship? Is it through state mandated policies? So the question then is someone working towards, or is there a system or a mechanism that enables people to fight against the very givens of their life? And what is the given of your life? Is the station that you are born in. So is there a stringent system that tells you this is who you are and you cannot aspire to anything beyond that? Then that's a different kind of hierarchy. If you are in a system where people say it doesn't really matter who your parents are, whether they are this or that, we will make sure that you have access to education, access to food, shelter, and care so that you can go and be the best you can. Then you have a different kind of social system, a social system which takes it for granted that every human being deserves a chance, and the state must provide that chance to escape the very given of their life, right? In any given society, that is always operative, right? Sometimes it is legally operative, sometimes it is socially operative, sometimes it is just de facto. Race plays a huge role on what people can accomplish, even though the laws of United States do not say that. How? First of all, you have to deal with racial prejudice. Two, if you are from a poor African American community, chances are you live in a poor neighborhood. Chances are if you live in a poor neighborhood, the industry has escaped from there and the drug dealers have come in. And so you have to deal with those people as well if you're a young teenager. Then your school system is not as well funded as a suburban school. So even if technically you have a right to a free education and then go to college, your school is not likely to be as well equipped as a suburban school. So all of these inequalities are then inscribed in that cultural experience. And that means there is no level playing ground. And so in any given society, there are always hierarchies. What we have to figure out is, are those hierarchies impermeable, unchangeable, immutable? Then there is a problem with that. Are those hierarchies of class, gender, and everything unstable and can be changed, removed, right? The idea is to have a society where mobility, lateral and upward, should be possible, right? But we will still not create an equal world, right? But in terms of who has how many resources. But we might be able to create a world in which everyone has access to the resources of the state and can pursue and follow whatever they think will make them better. And that's the possibility that we work with. Okay, so what is marginalization? I have a video on it. I would encourage you to watch that. But if you look at the word, a margin is always with reference to something that is centered. So anytime there is a small nucleus which contains more power and places others on the periphery, then those who are not permitted into that structure of power, social, political, are being marginalized. Okay, Faryal, we always used to talk about the colonizers in bad colonization, but not our own people who have marginalized the women at their own level, and that is I don't think so. Who the we is? I'm highly critical of the patriarchy in Pakistan and patriarchy everywhere else. In my work, yeah, I am with Spivak, right? It was a terrible system, but colonialism also created some enabling conditions. Now, that doesn't mean it was good, but in my work, both published and in this forum and everywhere else, I'm highly critical of gender hierarchies in Pakistan. I'm critical of the patriarchy, masculinity. I'm critical of any institution that claims a monopoly on truth and how things are to be said. So I don't know who you are talking about and who is the we. I don't consider myself as part of that we. And I would hope more and more are not part of that we. But these hierarchies exist. These social and political ills exist in all societies. The question is, are we aware of them and are we actively trying to fight them, right? That's the question. So coming back to the novel then, um, you can read it from any perspective. You can read it from the point of view of how technically the childhood narration is operative there, right? You can read it from the point of view of the regional politics of Kerala, both in 1960s and 1993, and how they impact the story. Then you can read it in terms of the experience of the individual characters and the trauma that shapes their lives. So that would come through trauma studies. And, if all else fails, you can just read it for pleasure, right? It's a beautifully written novel. It's poetic, right? And you can just enjoy how she tells this such a heartbreaking story uh, in such a beautiful way. So that's all I have to say about the novel. Now, you might have noticed also today, just like always, we start with a novel or a topic, but when we come to the questions kind of go in pretty much every direction. But that's part of this conversation. So I am going to conclude here and see if you have any other questions or comments. And try to answer them. But please keep in mind, we do this every Saturday at 10 o'clock my time. You can figure, and this is the central daylight time in United States. And quite a few of you always join me on Saturdays. And if I decide not to do it a week, I will always make an announcement on the community tab on the channel, on our Facebook group, and do please join it. It's called Postcolonial Space. You can just search it, it will show up. And we also make announcements sometimes on my website, which is postcolonial.net. All of these are available for you to use. We also now have a podcast, which is called Postcolonial Space. Also, it's available on Spotify, Apple, any other podcasting platform. So these are all the ways in which you can access the materials that are on this channel, on the website, and on the podcast. So good, yeah, Dini. That's how a reading ought to be. That every time you read a novel, you come up with something different, and that's a good thing because we shouldn't be seeking, a single or two answers to any novels or any texts. Okay, so I have another question here from Suryakant. What is your opinion of Roy's portrayal of Velutha? Critics have accused upper caste writers of portraying Dalit characters as voiceless. I disagree with that. I think Velutha comes across as the most noble character in the story. That is the problem everyone faces. If when you write these characters in the story, you are speaking in solidarity with someone else, and the chances are that you will get in trouble also for not carrying the burden of an entire culture or entire group. I think he is, to me, in my reading, he is the god of small things in the novel. But if someone from the Dalit community thinks that that is not a good enough representation, we have to hear it carefully and then teach ourselves how to read the novel differently. So Nimra, I don't have any particular published works, but if you do the search on my channel, you will see where my politics is. And it is anti-patriarchal. It is all those things. But if you read my last book on ISIS, you will see where I stand on religion and on gender hierarchies. But if it is not clear, I mean, I've stated it so many times in my videos, I believe in absolute equality of sexes, absolute equality of all races and human beings, and I do not believe in any qualifiers that tell me that someone is inferior to someone else. And that is my absolute humanistic belief as a human being. Okay, so that's all. Thank you so much. I'm going to sign off now. And this will be available in an edited form as well. But I will let you know what we'll be covering next week. Feel free to suggest anything if it is within the realm of my expertise and what we have planned for this long-term post-colonialism course. I'll try to work with you. But other than that, as always, thank you so much. And remember, peace and love.